Hello, everybody. Welcome back to WTF Science and Beyond. Each episode, we're going to dive into some sciencey stories, science in the news, or any other happening that makes you wonder what the fuck is going on. I'm your host, Lady Ayla Nicole, and it's been a minute. I started a new job and was working full time during my training, and my training was from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. Obviously, I know people get up early all the time, but it's just really doesn't agree with me. Like, I was kind of hoping I would get used to it and I could work first shift, but at 4 in the morning is just the middle of the night and my body's just not built for it. So I'm working second shift now, which is I don't love, but it's a little better suited for me. But anyway, that's why I haven't been around. So let's get back into it. I was hoping that Leland would be able to join us today, but work, kids, all that. And we've actually been trying probably for almost, it seems like a month, but a couple of weeks to hook up, and we just haven't been able to. So I wanted to bring you our next episode, and we're going to do this one on near death experiences. And Leland and I do have another episode planned. Hopefully, I can get her on soon. But this one, I'm going to go at it alone. It's about near death experiences. So let's do this. Today's episode talks about trauma, illness, and nearly dying. Please keep this in mind when deciding if you're going to listen. A near death experience, or NDE, is a profound personal experience associated with death or impending death, which researchers describe as having similar characteristics. Since CPR was invented in the 1960s, millions of people have reported near death experiences. Dr. Sam Parnia is an NYU Langone Health intensive care physician who has researched the phenomenon for decades. I personally have known three people who have had NDEs. One was a friend who had one after a car accident, or I guess in the middle of a car accident. One was my aunt after a car accident, and then my father in law had one. And then my sister died, but didn't have an NDE. So, what is a near death experience? This can occur when doctors bring a person back to life after the heart flatlines and breathing stops. It can happen in other instances, but for the purpose of the experiment that we're going to talk about, they collected data from people getting CPR. To start off, I found a firsthand account of an NDE. For length's sake, I edit it a little bit, but the experience is intact, and these are her own words. On a bitterly cold Valentine's Day, I put on my mother's wool coat. Bruce and I had planned to meet two other couples downtown at a restaurant. As we approached a busy intersection, my last memory was of feeling thankful when I spotted a brilliant green traffic light ahead. The stop at those two roads had always seemed like an eternity. We were running late, so I felt happy that we could breeze through. We didn't breeze through. Later, I learned that a man plowed through the intersection, crossed into our lane, and smashed into us head on. Based on the damage caused by the impact, this car had to be going more than 40 miles an hour. The collision turned our Volvo into rubble. The airbag hit my husband, breaking his glasses and cutting his forehead. When Bruce, who is a doctor, noticed me slumped and unconscious, he attempted to check my vitals. After he couldn't find signs of breathing or a heartbeat, he panicked and repeatedly yelled my name. Immediately after the crash, I had no awareness of myself as a unique entity. Instead, I felt utterly and profoundly peaceful in a way that I'd never sensed. To my core, I felt safe and at home. I seemed to be immersed in glowing yellow. I don't know how to subscribe the sensation, except that I felt as if I'd been dropped in a vat of pudding, but in a good way. I didn't feel dead. If anything, I felt blissfully alive. I experienced a comforting euphoria and sensed my essence shimmering in the middle of a life force. As I write these words, I'm reminded of string theory, the idea in theoretical physics that the whole universe is made of tiny, distinct strands, closed loops of energy, each string vibrating at its own frequency. Perhaps at that moment, I became a closed loop of energy, both part of and distinct from the rest of the universe. When I heard Bruce's voice calling my name from a vast distance, I felt annoyed. I wanted to stay put. To be honest, I don't remember making a clear decision to go back. At that point, I'm not sure if I felt that I had enough agency, that I possessed a self capable of making that decision. Over the years, I've become weepy when I remember my strong resistance to returning. Maybe the source of my tears is rooted in guilt, that my reluctance to return to my earthly body represents a betrayal of my loved ones, preferring the yellow pudding place to a continued life with them. Or maybe the weepiness is simply longing for the peace of that other home that I felt. When I finally did return to my body, inexplicably, I felt no pain. It took me a while to process that we'd been in an accident and that I was staring at the crushed interior of our once sturdy Volvo. I saw crooked headlights from the other vehicle shining into the interior of our car at a disturbing angle. Surreal light illuminated tiny, glimmering particles in front of me. Maybe there were parts of the deployed airbag, or maybe a substance emanating from the engine. My next memory is of a man opening the passenger door and talking to me. To this day, I can picture him clearly. In his 40s, curly hair with a receding hairline, button down dress shirt, and no tie. He said, "I'm going to release your seatbelt, but I don't want you to move unless the engine catches fire. I will stay with you until the ambulance arrives." Then the man knelt outside the car and held my hand until the emergency technicians showed up. Long after the crash, while we were comparing notes, Bruce told me he had no memory of the man and said he never saw anyone except the EMTs arriving. After hearing this, I wanted to track down the emergency personnel at the scene to both verify the existence of the guy and see if anyone took his name so I could thank him, but we were never able to find any witnesses. My memories of this are clear and precise. And what has an experiment discovered about what is going on physically during these human experiences? A study published in September of 2023, Resuscitation by Dr. Parnia, teams of trained personnel in 25 hospitals in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Bulgaria followed doctors into rooms where patients were coding or technically dead when they had flatlined. Flatlining or asystole is when your heart's electrical system fails entirely, which causes your heart to stop pumping and your heart's electrical activity appears as a flatline on an EKG. While doctors performed CPR, the research teams attached devices that measured oxygen and electrical activity to the dying person's head. Now, I have to wonder at this point, um, obviously, once the person flatlines, like you want to start CPR right away. And I'm going to assume that they were connecting these devices as the physicians were performing CPR. And it makes me wonder exactly how accurate they were, or did they catch the entire event? It's just something to think about. So the average resuscitation attempts lasted between 23 and 26 minutes. but some doctors continued to perform CPR for up to an hour. So, brain activity was measured at 2 or 3 minute intervals when doctors had to stop chest compressions or electrical shocks to see if the patient's heart would restart. Up to an hour into the resuscitation, they recorded the emergence of brain electrical activity, the same as when talking or concentrating. Those spikes included gamma, delta, theta, alpha, and beta waves. So all of the brain waves, those are all of the brain waves that you have. Gamma waves are linked to higher brain functions such as memory, cognition, and attention. Delta waves are the slowest recorded brain waves. They are found most often in infants and young children and are associated with the deepest levels of relaxation and restorative sleep. Delta is prominently seen in brain injuries, learning problems, inability to think, and severe ADHD. Theta waves they tend to happen when you're lightly sleeping, dreaming, or in a state of deep relaxation. Experts believe they play a role in processing information and making memories. Alpha waves are a medium frequency pattern of brain activity associated with restful and meditative states. Beta waves commonly observed in an awakened state. They're involved in conscious thought and logical thinking and tend to have a stimulating effect. So only 53 people of the 567 people in the study were brought back to life. So a very small percentage. Of those, 28 people were interviewed to see what they could remember. Only 11 patients reported being awake or being aware during CPR, and only 6 reported a near-death experience. So we're dwindling down. Those experiences were categorized along with testimonies from 126 survivors of cardiac arrest who were not in the study. And it showed that the recorded experience of death were consistent across people from all over the world. They also took the recorded brain signals and compared them with brain signals done by other studies on hallucinations, delusions, and illusions, and they were very different. And there's really no rhyme or reason to it, but this states that those brain signals were very different. They were able to conclude that the recalled experience of death is real. It occurs with death, and there's a brain marker that they have identified. But as you would expect, some experts in the field were less convinced by the study's conclusions. Dr. Bruce Greyson, who is a professor of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, said, "Those patients who had near-death experiences did not show the reported brainwaves, and those who did show the reported brainwaves did not report near-death experiences." Greyson, who was not involved in the new study, is the co-editor of the Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, 30 Years of Investigation. He and cardiologist Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch researcher and writer on near-death experiences, submitted comments to the journal to publish alongside the new study. They pointed to the study statement that 2 of the 28 interviewed subjects had EEG data, but weren't among those with explicit cognitive recall. So they're not really showing any correlation, but it gets better. Greyson continues, all the study has shown is that in some patients, there is continued electrical activity in the head that occurs during the same period that other patients report having NDEs. Dr. Parnia admits that the sample size of patients wasn't large enough. 11, yeah, not really that large. He admits that the sample size of patients wasn't large enough and most of the people didn't live, so they didn't have hundreds of survivors to interview. Of those that did live and had readable electroencephalograms, 40% of them showed that their brain waves went from flatline to showing normal signs of lucidity. In addition, people who survive often have fragmented memories or forget what they experienced due to heavy sedation in intensive care. Absence of record doesn't mean there's an absence of consciousness, Pernia said. Ultimately, this is the great unknown, and the key thing is that these are not hallucinations. These are real experiences that emerge with death. Now, the first part of that, and admittedly, I am not religious, but the absence of record doesn't mean that there's an absence of consciousness. This sounds to me a lot like faith, like a religious faith. Even though we don't have scientific evidence of it, it's still happening. And I can jive with that. Like ghosts, there's no physical evidence, but I've seen them, I've heard them, I've smelled them, I know what I've seen, I know what I've heard. Just because science hasn't been able to definitively define it doesn't mean that it's not a real thing. And we could say that all through the history of religion. Like there are a lot of things now that we subscribe or assign to science that before we knew that, we consider them to be gods, to be active gods, to be supernatural things. Now it's more of a science really explains a lot. And now that most people understand that scientific discoveries are valid, when things come along that we don't understand, like now we're attributing it to aliens. So this is a journey for everybody. If I had to give my guess on this, it's like your brain going into spasm, like I said before. It's shooting at all of the rays it has, perhaps as its own type of CPR. But I'm not a doctor or a researcher. I'm just some girl sitting at her kitchen table. Many of the people who have positive NDEs report similar details no matter what religion or culture they come from. Moving towards a light, seeing deceased loved ones, feelings of inner peace, out of body experiences, traveling in a dark environment, which is usually associated with passing through a tunnel, reviewing one's life from childhood onwards, entering an extraterrestrial other realm, and communicating with sentient beings. But many people experience similar thoughts or feelings in the processes of daily life. And that's how we're able to study things psychologically and socially. These people also report the after effects in their daily lives. The occurrence of these experiences leads to positive consequences in some people, such as a more altruistic life, higher spiritual growth, having interest in the meaning of life, fewer materialistic values, or a reduction in the fear of death. It's kind of like the placebo effect. It might be real, it might not be, but whatever is leading you to a positive outcome is valid. But what about a more scientific explanation? Now, I have no doubt that these people are experiencing something, but can the experiences be explained physically? And the answer is yes. When the heart stops circulating blood, the brain is deprived of oxygen while carbon dioxide increases. Not only are the symptoms of anoxia very similar to the symptoms of an NDE, but patients who had the highest concentrations of carbon dioxide in their blood reported significantly more NDEs than those with lower levels. And if you remember my episode on the sarcopod, that's what was happening there. You're basically being deprived of oxygen in an attempt to create a euphoric feeling instead of like a panicked feeling while you're dying. Several drugs have also been found to cause near death or out of body experiences, including ketamine, which is a hallucinogen used mainly as an aesthetic. It's also like a club drug. Like if you're familiar with the Club Kids is probably the best known example of it. They were taking a lot of ketamine. Though many believe that near death experiences provide evidence of life after death, the fact that they can be chemically induced suggests another possible cause. But what about negative NDEs? We don't hear about this usually. Is it because people are less likely to discuss them or because it doesn't fit the narrative of a peaceful afterlife? Like, again, researching this, plenty of information about the positive NDs and how it's, an afterlife and it's linked to a God, but really having to search for the negative aspects. Whatever the reason for this, there are very real after effects of those negative experiences. And part of the reason that it might not be as easy to come across is that these people hide. They disappear when asked for information. If an inpatient, they are likely to withdraw and they are under great stress. There are three categories of negative NDEs. The first kind is an inverse NDE. The features usually reported in other NDEs as pleasurable are perceived as hostile or threatening. A man thrown from his horse found himself floating at treetop height, watching emergency medical technicians working over his body. No, no, this isn't right, he screamed. Put me back. But they did not hear him. Next, he was shooting through a darkness toward a bright light, flashing past shadowy people who seemed to be deceased family members waiting. He was panic stricken by the bizarre scenario and his inability to affect what was happening. So, if you were sedated, like they're suggesting that the positive ND experiencers, if you were sedated, so those things are designed to decrease your anxiety along with the lack of oxygen. So, I have to wonder again, like how much of this is drug induced? How much of that feeling of peacefulness is just that, like Ativan? I don't know if anybody's ever taken anything for anti-anxiety, but that's sure gonna make you feel good. The next is avoid NDE. A woman in childbirth felt herself floating on the water, but at a certain point, it was no longer a peaceful feeling. It had become pure hell. I had become a light out in the heavens and I was screaming, but no sound was going forth. It was worse than any nightmare. I was spinning around and I realized that this was eternity. This was what forever was going to be. I felt the aloneness, the emptiness of space, the vastness of the universe, except for me, a mere ball of light screaming. Then we have the hellish NDE. A woman who hemorrhaged from a ruptured fallopian tube reported an NDE involving horrific beings with gray gelatinous appendages grasping and clawing at me. The sounds of their guttural moaning and the indescribable stench still remains 41 years later. There is no benign being of light, no life video, nothing beautiful or pleasant. So I went on to read several experiences of negative NDEs, and a lot of them had to do with experiences during childbirth. Maybe it's just that women are more likely to talk about these things, or whatever is going on with the body during these events are more likely to create negative interpretation. It's really impossible to say. So, a classic response to a profound experience is conversion, not necessarily changing one's religion, but to turn it around. The terrifying NDE is interpreted as a warning about unwise or wrong behaviors. One subject states, I was being shown that I had to shape up or ship out, one or the other. In other words, get your act together. And I did just that. Movement towards a dogmatic religious community is common in this group. Clinical social worker Kimberly Clark Sharp observed, all the people I know who have had negative experiences have become Bible-based Christians. They might express it in various sects, but they all feel that they have come back from an awful situation and have a second chance. So they don't go on to subscribe to any other religion. Or maybe there's just no study on that. Fear may remain a powerful influence, but a strict theology may offer a way out. The atheist professor who experienced being maliciously pinched, then torn apart by malevolent beings, left his university and attended seminary. 3 others also reported newfound devotion. I've stopped drugs, moved back to Florida, and now I'm in Bible college. I used to have a casual attitude towards death, but now I actually fear it more. So, yes, it was a warning. I was permitted another chance to change my behavior on earth. I've taken my fear of death and given it to the scriptures. Since then, I have dedicated my life to the Most High God Jehovah and spend 60 hours a month speaking and teaching about the Creator of heaven and earth and all living creatures. I'm not worried now about when I die because now I know that God has something promised us, something far more. You know what this sounds like to me? This sounds like a fucking serial killer that went to prison and all of a sudden has discovered God. Like it makes you wonder what kind of depraved life that these people were living that this made them just completely these religious people. And it also makes me wonder, like, the Christian religion is really, it's guilt based. Maybe not Christian Catholics for sure. I know their religion is really guilt based, so it makes me wonder what exactly, which sect of religion that all of a sudden they found after this experience of negativity. And yeah, it just sounds like a serial killer to me that found God after going to prison. The next reaction is reductionism. It was only as a response to a distressing experience. Reductionism has been described as the defense that allows one to repudiate the meaning of an event which does not fit into a safe category and to treat the event as if it did not matter. A woman whose anaphylactic reaction precipitated an NDE with both loving and frightening elements concluded, there are actual rational explanations for what I experienced. The brain under stress releases natural opiates that stop pain and fear. Lack of oxygen disrupts the normal activity of the visual cortex. Too much neural activity in the dying brain causes stripes of activity. Our eyes, even closed, interpret those stripes of activity as the sensation of moving forward in a tunnel. There are more brain cells concentrated in the middle of the cortex than on the outer edges. So, as we get closer to death, the brain interprets all of those dense cells with their crazy activity as a bright light in the middle of our visual field. It's all very scientific. A woman who had a terrifying experience during childbirth likewise dismissed the reality of the experience. Perhaps it was the effects of the ether. A woman attacked by a lion dismissed the memory of her NDE as hallucinatory. I often wonder if, in the shock of the attack, my mind played tricks on me and that I may have just been unconscious and my brain deprived of oxygen. A man who, for many years, had spoken publicly about his radiant NDE had a second experience in which he felt attacked by gigantic, sinister, threatening geometric forms, leaving him with a deep seated pessimism and terror of dying. Learning that drug induced hallucinations include geometric forms, he concluded that his second NDE was only a drug reaction. This may have been an appropriate conclusion clinically, but the experience remains. Reductionism provides a temporary buffer to mask questions and anxieties, but does nothing to resolve them. I don't like that. How do I want to explain it? Like, I'm an atheist, and I've heard people say to me, like, why should I walk around terrified? Like, why don't I just believe in God and accept that, there's this afterlife and be at peace? And I'm like, but I'm not terrified. What terrifies me is kind of what this other woman had, like just this eternity of wandering around in space. That's more terrifying to me than being completely unconscious and just dying. So it's still up for debate, but the fact is that nobody has ever truly died and come back to tell the tale. So we probably will never have a definitive answer. In fact, really, I mean, we won't. You can never completely die and come back. One of the most interesting stories I've heard is about a guy who was knocked unconscious when he was hit by a car. I'm not sure if he died, so I don't know if this is classified as an NDE, but I think that it fits in here somewhere because it was an unconscious experience. So he was hit by a car, and when he came to, after only a few minutes on the ground, he had lived years of another life. He had a great job, a wife who was able to stay home with the two beautiful children, a house, love, happiness, all the things that life can be made of. And when he woke up, he went through years of depression, realizing it wasn't real, but grieving it and missing it and hoping to see his wife in his dreams. He never did, but he would see his son in his peripheral vision. I don't know if this story is real or a really great short story. If he really did experience it, I think it was akin to a dream. You can dream for a few minutes, but it can seem like hours or days. I had a dream 30 years ago that I know was a dream, but it feels like a memory. All this to say that the mind can do some crazy things. And this will bring us to the end of the episode on near death experiences. What do you guys think they are? Have you had one? Do you know someone who's had one? Let me know in the comments below. Give the show a like, a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Thanks to everyone who is hanging in there with the editing growing pains. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube under Lady Ayla Nicole, and now on TikTok. Thank you everyone for joining me. And until next time, don't try this at home. Bye.